The silence in the house was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It was a physical weight pressing down on me, filling the spaces where laughter and the sound of small feet running on hardwood floors used to be. I was still wearing the same black dress from yesterday. I could still feel the phantom grit of dirt under my fingernails, a ghostly reminder of filling in my son's grave myself, my beautiful, brave boy, Tyler. Gone at 9 years old, the house felt empty. Not just quiet, but hollowed out like its soul had been scooped out, leaving behind a sterile shell. I stood in the kitchen, staring at a coffee mug Tyler had painted for me 2 Mother's Days ago, a lopsided dinosaur that was supposed to be a T-Rex but looked more like a green chicken. A single dry sob escaped my throat, a sound more like a gasp for air than an expression of grief. Then the phone rang. It shrilled through the quiet, an alien sound in a world that had stopped making sense. For a moment, I just stared at my mother's name glowing on the screen. Susan. I didn't want to answer. I didn't have the strength for condolences that felt like checkboxes on a to-do list, but I knew she would just keep calling. I pressed the green icon, my thumb moving with a will of its own. Allison, honey, just checking in. How are you holding up? Her voice was bright, a little too loud, like she was trying to project cheerfulness through the phone line. I'm here, Mom. The words came out raspy. I hadn't spoken since I'd thanked the groundskeeper who had locked the cemetery gates behind me last night. I know this is just the hardest thing, sweetheart. We're all just devastated. I didn't answer. Devastated. They had been so devastated that they chose to attend my sister Patricia's engagement party across town instead of their only grandson's funeral. They knew the time. They knew the place. They chose champagne and canapes. The silence stretched, and I could hear her clear her throat, a little nervous tick she had when she was about to push for something. Listen, honey, I know the timing is awful, truly, but we have to think about the living too, about family moving forward. My stomach clenched. I knew this tone. This was her we need a favor voice, wrapped in a thin blanket of concern. Patricia is just so overwhelmed. With all the wedding planning, she continued her voice, dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. You know how it is. So many details, so many deposits. And with the venue, they need a significant payment by Friday, or she loses her spot. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. The cold marble bit into my palm. Mom, what are you asking? There was a brief pause, the only hesitation she'd shown. Then the blade. Well, we were talking and we figured Tyler's trust fund could cover it. It's just sitting there and, well, the phone felt heavy as a brick in my hand, pulling my arm down. My breath hitched. For a second, I thought I was going to be sick right there on the kitchen floor. The trust fund, $50,000 left by my late husband's family to secure a future for Tyler that he would now never have. College, a down payment on a house, a life. All of it gone. Patricia needs $12,000 for the catering deposit, she said, the words tumbling out faster now that the worst part was over. And we just thought it would be a beautiful way to have Tyler be a part of her special day, to help the family. Then came the final brutal twist of the knife. We need that trust money for the wedding, Allison. Stop being selfish. Selfish. The word echoed in the cavernous silence of my house. I, who had spent the last 3 years of my life sleeping in hospital chairs, who had held my son's hand through every agonizing treatment, who had just buried him alone, was being selfish. My voice, when I finally found it, was a hollow whisper. The lawyer, he'll need a few days to process anything. Mom, it's not a checking account. A few days, Allison Patricia loses her spot. On Friday, she snapped the fake sympathy gone, replaced by pure, unfiltered irritation. Can't you just transfer the money from your account and get reimbursed? For your sister, I closed my eyes, the image of their smiling faces at the party burning behind my lids. Family happiness, my mother had called it. While I shoveled dirt onto my own child's coffin, my hands raw and bleeding, they had celebrated family happiness. I'll take care of it, I heard myself say. The words were automatic, the response of a daughter conditioned for a lifetime to keep the peace. Perfect. Oh, honey, you're a lifesaver. Patricia will be so thrilled. Her voice was light again, airy with relief. And Allison, try to focus on the positive. Patricia's wedding will be a fresh start for all of us. The call ended. I didn't hang up. I just let the phone drop from my hand, its clatter on the tile floor barely registering. I stood frozen in the center of my kitchen. The tears didn't come. Something else did. Something cold and sharp, like a shard of ice forming in my chest where my heart used to be. A fresh start. They wanted a fresh start paid for with the last remnants of my son's stolen future. And in that moment, I knew I would give them a fresh start, just not the one they were expecting. For a long time, I just stood there, the broken silence of the house now filled with the echo of my mother's words. Stop being selfish. The phrase played on a loop in my head, each repetition chipping away at the fragile shell of my composure. It wasn't a new sentiment from them, just a more brutal version of a story they'd been telling for years. My needs were secondary. My feelings were inconvenient. My life, and by extension, my son's, was an interruption to their perfectly curated existence. My mind drifted back 6 months. Tyler had been in the hospital for another brutal round of chemotherapy. He was small for his age, made smaller by the illness swimming in the oversized hospital gown. He'd been asking for Grandpa David to come read to him. It was their thing. Grandpa would do all the voices for the dinosaurs, his deep voice booming as the T-Rex, a high-pitched squeak for the Compsognathus. It was the only thing that made Tyler smile that week. I called my dad's accounting firm 3 times that day. The first time, his secretary, a woman named Carol, who had known me since I was a child, sounded apologetic. He's in a client meeting Allison. I'll have him call you the second he's free. The second time, her voice was tighter. He's still tied up, I'm sorry. By the third call, her tone was clipped. Allison, he's in back-to-back meetings. He can't be disturbed. Of course, he was in meetings. Important meetings for important clients. More important than his grandson who was fighting for his life just a 20-minute drive away. My phone buzzed on the floor, rattling against the tile. I flinched the sound, pulling me back to the present. I bent down and picked it up. The screen was cracked in the corner from the fall. A new message had appeared. It was from Patricia. Hey, so sorry to bother you. I know you're going through a lot. But what do you think of peony, pink versus blush for the bridesmaid dresses? Mom says peony is more classic, but I think blush is more romantic. Let me know XOXO. I stared at the words, at the cheerful string of letters that felt more obscene than any curse word. She was asking me about shades of pink. My son was dead. My son, her nephew, was in the ground, and she was debating shades of pink for a party he would never attend, a party they all chose over him. My thumb hovered over the Instagram icon. I knew I shouldn't. I knew it would be like pressing on a bruise, a deliberate act of self-harm. But I had to see. I had to know what their devastation really looked like. I opened the app. Her profile was the first story in the queue, a bright pink and purple circle pulsating with life. My life had stopped, but hers was spinning forward, vibrant and loud. I tapped it. There they were. My father, my mother, Patricia, and her real estate developer fiancé, Brad. All of them packed into a plush leather booth at their favorite downtown steakhouse. Dad was holding a glass of red wine, his face flushed and jovial. Mom was laughing, her head thrown back. Patricia was showing off her engagement ring to the camera, while Brad smirked beside her. The table was covered in perfectly plated food, glistening steaks, mountains of truffle fries, artfully arranged salads. It was a portrait of carefree suburban success. And there in the top left corner of the screen was the timestamp, posted 6 months ago. It was the same evening I had called my father 3 times. The same evening Tyler was throwing up the meager contents of his stomach, his small body racked with tremors from the chemo. The same evening he had cried in my arms, his voice a tiny, heartbreaking whisper, asking why his grandparents didn't love him anymore. They weren't in meetings. They were having a celebratory dinner. And just like that, the ice in my chest spread, freezing everything that was left of my naive hope. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It was a choice. They had always chosen themselves. I finally understood. I wasn't just grieving my son. I was grieving the loss of my entire family for the people I had desperately wanted them to be, the people they had proven once and for all they would never be. 2 days later, my mother called again. Her voice was syrupy sweet, the tone she used when she was trying to smooth over a conflict she had started. Honey, I was thinking, she began, we should have a family dinner, a proper one, just the 4 of us and Brad, of course. A healing gathering where we can all process our grief together and talk about the wedding plans. a healing gathering. The audacity was breathtaking. They wanted to use the pretense of mourning my son as a business meeting to discuss how to spend his money. Every instinct screamed at me to say no, to hang up, to block their numbers and disappear into the silent fortress of my grief. But a cold, hard thought stopped me. I needed to see it for myself. I needed to sit across from them, look into their eyes, and understand the full depth of their delusion. I needed to know, without a shadow of a doubt, that they were beyond saving. "Okay, Mom," I said, my voice flat, "I'll be there." The evening of the dinner, as I was getting ready, my phone buzzed with another text from Patricia. I had been ignoring her messages about floral arrangements and color palettes, but this one I opened. "Oh my God, sis, I am so excited for tonight. Mom told me you're helping out and it means we can get the band. I really wanted. They played at a celebrity wedding last year. You are literally the best sister ever." I read the message twice. The sheer, unadulterated joy in it, the complete absence of shame or even mild awareness was staggering. She wasn't just accepting the money, she was celebrating it. She was giddy at the thought of funding her dream party with the legacy of her dead nephew. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound, empty coldness. I drove to their house in Scottsdale, the manicured lawns and identical terracotta roofs blurring past my window. Their home was a perfect picture of suburban success, a 2-story beige temple to my father's financial achievements, a place where appearances were everything and substance was an afterthought. My father, David, opened the door before I could knock, pulling me into a hug that felt stiff and rehearsed a performance for an unseen audience. "Allison, sweetheart, we're so glad you came. Your mother made your favorite pot roast." My favorite pot roast. As if a meal could fill the gaping hole they had carved into our family. In the dining room, the table was set with my mother's best china, the kind reserved for major holidays. Apparently, divvying up my dead son's inheritance qualified as a special occasion. Patricia and Brad were already seated, Patricia glowing, Brad looking bored as he scrolled through his phone. The dinner began with a clumsy performance of grief. They shared a few generic, sanitized memories of Tyler speaking of him in the past tense, as if he were a distant relative they barely knew. They talked about how we've all been through so much as if our suffering was a shared equal burden. I let them talk, my fork moving mechanically, the food tasteless in my mouth. Then my father cleared his throat, signaling the end of the appetizers and the beginning of the main course. So he began, his voice taking on a business-like tone. "Your mother mentioned you're willing to help with the wedding expenses. That's very generous, Allison. Tyler would want his money to go towards something beautiful," my mother added quickly, as if to sanctify the transaction. I almost choked. Tyler would have wanted his money to buy a new dinosaur encyclopedia or maybe to fund a dig for velociraptor bones. He would have wanted it to help other sick kids, not this. Patricia leaned forward, her eyes shining with avarice disguised as inspiration. "I've been thinking about the most meaningful way to honor Tyler at the wedding." I braced myself. I was thinking, she said, a thoughtful frown creasing her brow. "We could have a small memorial table, with his photo and maybe a nice candle. Something tasteful, of course. Something that doesn't bring down the mood too much." There it was. The final, unforgivable insult. They wanted to reduce my son in all his brilliant, vibrant, dinosaur-loving glory to a tasteful prop at their party. A footnote in their celebration, carefully managed so as not to spoil the fun. I set my fork down. A strange calm washed over me. Saturday I listened, and I knew it was over. The time for grieving my family was done. The time for justice was about to begin. I drove home from my parents' house on autopilot, the familiar streets of Scottsdale, looking alien and strange. The rage and the grief that had been churning inside me for days had finally settled into something else. Something quiet and heavy and dangerously clear. They would never understand. They would never feel remorse. They would never see their own reflection in the ruin they had created. Trying to appeal to their empathy was like trying to strike a match in a vacuum. There was simply nothing there to ignite. When I got home, I walked straight to Tyler's room. His dinosaur posters still covered the walls, a vibrant Jurassic world frozen in time. I sat on the edge of his bed, picking up his favorite stuffed Triceratops, Herbert. I needed to talk to someone who understood, someone who saw my family for what they truly were. I pulled out my phone and dialed my Aunt Grace. She picked up on the second ring, her voice calm and steady. "Allison, Is everything all right? I told her everything. The dinner, the pot roast, the discussion of upgrading the wedding band. I told her about Patricia's idea for a tasteful memorial table. I expected her to gasp to rage on my behalf. Instead, there was just a tired sigh. Of course she did, Grace said, her voice laced with a familiar, weary disgust. That's them, Allison. They live in a world made of glass, and they can't see anything beyond their own reflections. They don't see cruelty, they see logistics. They don't see your pain, they see an obstacle to their party. What do I do, Grace, I whispered. How do I fight people who don't even know they're in a war? You don't fight them on their terms, she said, her voice hardening. Don't scream, don't cry, don't try to make them feel what they're incapable of feeling. You have to be smarter than them. You have to use their own arrogance against them. We hung up a few minutes later, but her words echoed in my head. Use their own arrogance against them. I looked around Tyler's room at the books about science and history, at the carefully organized Lego sets. My son had been a planner, a builder. He loved systems and rules. And I, as a nurse, lived in a world of procedure. Checklists, documentation, consent forms, a world where things had to be done in a certain order, where everything needed a paper trail. They saw this as a financial transaction. They wanted to withdraw funds. So I would give them a transaction, I would give them paperwork, and that's when the idea sparked. A tiny cold flicker in the darkness of my mind. I walked out of Tyler's room and went to my small desk in the living room. I opened my laptop. The glow of the screen lit up the dark room and my determined face. I didn't use a template. I built the trap from scratch. I created a new document, designing a professional letterhead at the top, the Harrison Trust Estate of Tyler J. Harrison. It looked official. It looked intimidating. I titled the document Form 7B, Request for Unplanned Fund Diversion. I spent the next 2 hours crafting it. I designed the document. I crafted each question. I built the cage bar by meticulous bar. I broke it down into sections, each one a subtle barb disguised as bureaucracy. Section A was justification for fund diversion. The key question was, please provide a detailed narrative explaining why the proposed social event, the wedding of Patricia Miller, serves as a more fitting and beneficial tribute to the memory of the beneficiary, Tyler Harrison, than a charitable contribution in his name. Section B was statement of familial support. This was the master stroke. It required a detailed account of their involvement in Tyler's life. The question read, to establish familial standing and emotional investment, please describe your direct personal support and involvement with the beneficiary during the final 6 months of his life. Please include specific dates of hospital visits, assistance provided, and emotional support offered. The final section required them to sign an affidavit swearing that all statements were true and accurate for the purposes of formal review by the trust's legal representatives. I knew them. Their greed would blind them to the trap. Their self-absorption would make them eager to write their own heroic narrative, a story where they were the loving, supportive family making a tough but necessary decision. They would see it as a bureaucratic hurdle, an annoying piece of paperwork standing between them and $50,000. They would never see it for what it was, a confession. When I was finished, I saved the file as a PDF. It was perfect, cold, official, unforgiving. It wasn't a letter, it was a cage. And I knew with absolute certainty that they would walk right into it. The next morning, I woke up with a purpose. For the first time since Tyler's diagnosis, the grief wasn't the first thing I felt. It was still there, a heavy blanket in the background, but at the forefront was a cold, clear resolve. I made coffee, sat at my desk, and opened my laptop. I drafted a new email. The subject line read, Action Required. Form 7B, Estate of Tyler J. Harrison. I addressed it to my father and CC'd my mother and Patricia. The body of the email was brief and professional. Dear family, following up on our conversation, I have confirmed with the estate lawyer the necessary procedure for the fund diversion you requested. Due to the non-standard nature of the request, the trust board requires the attached form to be completed in full. Please pay special attention to sections A and B. The lawyer has advised that a video recording of your statements will add significant weight to the petition. Please return the completed documentation at your earliest convenience so we may proceed. Sincerely, Allison Harrison, executor. I attached the PDF, the cage I had so carefully built, and hit send. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was my father. Allison, what in the world is all this legal nonsense? He blustered, his voice thick with annoyance. A request for unplanned fund diversion. Just tell the lawyer to push it through. He works for us. He works for the trust, Dad, I said, my voice even and calm. I had rehearsed this. And this is a non-negotiable requirement from the board. It's just a formality. The sooner you complete it, the sooner we can move forward. There was a grumble on the other end of the line. A video. You want us to make a video? It was the lawyer's suggestion. I lied smoothly. To show the board how much this means to the family. To add a personal touch. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. A personal touch. An opportunity to perform. That was the language he understood. Fine, he sighed. Fine, we'll get this ridiculous thing done. Send me Patricia's email again. I want to make sure she sees exactly what needs to be said. Days passed. It was a strange, suspended time. I went to work at the hospital, moving through the halls of the pediatric oncology ward that had once been my personal hell, now just a place of quiet purpose. I visited Tyler's grave every evening after my shift. I'd sit on the grass beside the small headstone and tell him what I was doing. They think they're writing a letter to get money, I whispered to the cool stone, tracing the letters of his name. But they're not. They're writing an apology to you, baby. They just don't know it yet. Then, 3 days after I had sent the form, an email landed in my inbox. It was from Patricia. The subject line read, "Here's the stupid video for the lawyer. Finally." Attached was a single video file. My heart began to pound a heavy, rhythmic drum against my ribs. I took a deep breath, my hand hovering over the mouse. This was it. The point of no return. I clicked play. The video opened on my father's home office. They had staged it carefully with leather-bound books artfully arranged behind them. They were all dressed up, a united front of grieving relatives ready to make their case. My father spoke first, his voice dripping with false sincerity and business jargon. He talked about maximizing the asset's potential for familial cohesion and how a wedding was a forward-looking investment in the family's emotional portfolio. He was selling their greed like it was a stock tip. Then it was my mother's turn. She dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue. Tyler loved celebrations, she said, her voice thick with manufactured emotion. He had such a joyful spirit. And we just know that he would want his legacy to be one of happiness, of love. This wedding, this beautiful union, it's what he would have wanted for his favorite aunt. It was a masterful performance. I almost felt a flicker of admiration for the sheer artistry of her lies. But Patricia was the star of the show. She was the one who sealed their fate. She launched into a tearful monologue about how difficult the last few years had been for everyone. How her wedding was the light at the end of a very dark tunnel for the whole family. Then she delivered the fatal blow. Honestly, she said, looking directly into the camera, with earnest, pleading eyes, we deserve this. After everything we've sacrificed all the time and emotional energy we poured into Tyler's situation, we need a win. We need something to celebrate. The video ended. I sat in the silence, the echo of their words hanging in the air. We deserve this. They had written their own confession, signed and delivered. I saved the file to my hard drive. Then I dragged a copy to a secure cloud server. Then I made another copy onto a USB stick, which I labeled and placed in my desk drawer. The progress bar on the screen filled a thin blue line, sealing their destiny. The transfer was complete, so were they. They just didn't know it yet. 1 week. I let them wait for 1 full week. I let them marinate in their greed and anticipation, imagining the deposits they would make, the vendors they would book. It was a small, cruel act, but it felt necessary. It gave me time to finalize the last piece of my architectural design. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a small coffee shop downtown, my phone pressed to my ear. "Ms. Torres, this is Allison Harrison. Thank you for taking my call." Melissa Torres was an investigative reporter for Channel 12 News, a local legend with a reputation for taking on stories of exploitation and fraud. I had watched her work for years. She was sharp, relentless, and had a finely tuned detector for hypocrisy. Of course, Miss Harrison. Your email was intriguing, she said, her voice a low professional purr. You said you have proof of a family attempting to coerce funds from a deceased child's trust. I have something better, I said, my voice steady. I have a video confession willingly provided by them in which they justify why their party is more important than their grandson's funeral. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her processing the sheer brazen callousness of it. Meet me in 20 minutes, she said. The next day, I made the final call to my father. Dad, I said, my voice crisp and businesslike. Good news. The board has reviewed your submission. They've approved the transfer pending a final in-person signature. The lawyer's associate will meet us at a satellite office downtown tomorrow at noon to finalize. Finally, he grumbled. Took them long enough. Send me the address. I gave him the address of a conference room I had booked at the Phoenician, one of the most luxurious hotels in Scottsdale. The location was deliberate. It would appeal to their sense of status and make the meeting feel important and legitimate. The morning of the confrontation, I woke up feeling unnervingly calm. The storm inside me had passed, leaving behind a placid, frozen lake. I chose my outfit with care. Simple black trousers, a plain gray silk blouse, and flat shoes. It was armor, not costume. I wasn't there to perform. I was there to officiate. As I was about to walk out the door, my phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. See you soon. Can't wait to get this over with and go deposit this check. Time to make my wedding dreams a reality. I looked at the message at the winking emoji and felt a final, definitive click inside my soul. The last bit of familial sentiment, the last ghost of the sister I once loved, evaporated. There was nothing left but the plan. I arrived at the hotel 15 minutes early. Melissa Torres was already there, along with a quiet, efficient cameraman who was setting up a small, discreet camera in the corner of the conference room, angled to capture the entire table. The room was generic and expensive, with polished mahogany and leather chairs. Are you ready for this? Melissa asked, her eyes searching mine. I've been ready for a long time, I said. They arrived at noon, precisely. They walked in. My father, beaming, looking every bit the successful patriarch about to close a deal. My mother preening in a new dress, no doubt purchased in anticipation of the windfall. Patricia, practically vibrating with an energy that was equal parts excitement and impatience. They saw the professional setting, the long table, the pitcher of ice water. They saw the camera and likely assumed it was for a formal deposition, a sign of their own importance. A standard procedure for such a large sum. They smiled. The door to the conference room clicked shut behind them. Trapped. My father took the seat at the head of the table, a position he always assumed by default. All right, he said, rubbing his hands together. Let's get this done. Where's the lawyer? I stood up from my chair at the opposite end of the table. Thank you all for coming, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. There's no lawyer's associate. Their smiles faltered, replaced by looks of confusion. This is Melissa Torres, I said, gesturing to the woman sitting calmly to my right, an investigative reporter with Channel 12 News. She's the trust representative you're meeting with today. The change in the room was instantaneous. The air, which moments before had been filled with their smug, self-congratulatory energy, suddenly became thick and still. 3 smiling faces morphed into masks of disbelief. My father was the first to find his voice. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. What is this? What's going on, Allison? Is this some kind of joke? Please have a seat, Dad, I said, my voice unnaturally calm. The meeting is just getting started. A reporter, Patricia, whispered, her face draining of all color. Why is there a reporter here? I ignored her and looked directly at my father. There is no money to sign for. There is no check to deposit. I'm sorry you wasted a trip. The dam of their composure broke. What do you mean, Patricia shrieked, jumping to her feet. You said it was approved. You said we were here to finalize it. You ruined my wedding, my mother wailed her carefully, constructed mask of the grieving matriarch shattering into a million pieces. You cruel, cruel girl, how could you do this to your own sister? My father pointed a trembling finger at me, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. You will not get away with this, Allison. I will call my lawyer. I will have you removed as executor. I will sue you for every last penny. They were all shouting now, a chorus of entitlement and rage, their true selves, finally on full display for the silent rolling camera in the corner. I let them scream. I let them exhaust their threats and their accusations. I let them show Melissa Torres exactly who they were. When their tirade finally sputtered into ragged breaths, I raised a small black remote from the table and pointed it at the large television screen mounted on the wall. You want to talk about what's cruel? I asked, my voice cutting through the tense silence. Let's review your own testimony. I pressed the button. The screen flickered to life. And there they were, the three of them sitting in my father's office looking polished and earnest, their own faces stared back at them, frozen in a moment of supreme self-deception. My father's recorded voice filled the room. We see this as maximizing the asset's potential for familial cohesion. I watched his face in the conference room contort with horror as he heard his own pompous, empty words. Then my mother dabbing her dry eyes. He would want his legacy to be one of happiness, of love. This wedding, it's what he would have wanted for his favorite aunt. In the conference room, my real mother let out a small strangled sob. Finally, it was Patricia's turn. Her recorded self, tearful and righteous, we deserve this. After everything we've sacrificed, we need a win. The real Patricia stared at the screen, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream. When the video ended, the silence in the room was absolute. It was heavier than grief, thicker than anger. It was the silence of total, undeniable exposure. Melissa Torres leaned forward, her pen poised over her notepad. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the force of a judgment. Mr. Miller, she began, her eyes fixed on my father. In the video, you referred to the trust as an asset and the wedding as an investment in the family's emotional portfolio. Could you elaborate for our viewers on how that portfolio is valued against the final months of your grandson's life, during which your family was, by your own admission, too busy to visit? My father opened and closed his mouth like a fish. No sound came out. Melissa turned to my mother. Mrs. Miller, you claim to know what your grandson would have wanted. Did he ever express a desire for his trust fund to be spent on a party that you chose to attend instead of his funeral? My mother just shook her head, tears now streaming down her face. Real tears this time, tears of pure humiliation. Finally, Melissa's gaze settled on my sister and Miss Miller. You said, and I quote, "We deserve this." Could you please explain what exactly you feel you and your family are owed? Patricia just stared at her face a mask of ruin. The dream wedding, the social status, the perfect life, all of it had just evaporated on a 50-inch screen. They had nothing to say. For the first time in their lives, they were utterly and completely silent. They left the conference room like ghosts, not speaking, not looking at each other. My father's face was ashen, my mother's was blotchy and swollen from her humiliated tears, and Patricia looked like a hollowed-out doll. The energy, the arrogance, the righteous indignation, all of it had been snuffed out, leaving behind only the pathetic smoke of their ruin. Melissa Torres turned to me after they were gone. The story will air next Thursday, she said, her voice soft but firm. We won't use their names, but the facts will be clear. You did a brave thing today, Allison. I nodded, unable to form words. I didn't feel brave. I felt empty. But it was a clean, quiet emptiness, like a house after a violent storm has finally passed, leaving behind a strange and welcome peace. The fight was over. The news story aired the following Thursday, just as Melissa had promised. It was a masterpiece of journalistic precision. She laid out the facts without melodrama, a grieving mother, a child's trust fund, a family's unthinkable demand, and a donation made to honor a life cut short. She had an interview with a legal expert who confirmed the donation was ironclad and called the family's actions morally reprehensible. The video of their confession was the centerpiece, their faces blurred, their voices slightly distorted, but their words, their horrible self-serving words, were perfectly clear. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Clients began pulling their accounts from my father's firm. It started as a trickle, then became a flood. In their affluent Scottsdale circle, reputation was currency, and his had just been declared bankrupt. Within 3 months, the business he had spent a lifetime building had collapsed. Brad Patricia's fiancé called off the wedding permanently the day after the story aired. He released a short, brutal statement to their mutual friends saying he could not, in good conscience, marry into a family that had displayed such a profound and disturbing lack of character. Patricia lost her fiancé, her dream wedding, and the future she had been willing to sacrifice her nephew's memory for. They became social pariahs. Whispers followed them in the grocery store. Old friends crossed the street to avoid them. The community they had worked so hard to impress now looked at them with a mixture of pity and disgust. They lost everything they had ever valued. I watched it all happen from a distance, not with glee, but with the detached finality of a chapter closing. It wasn't my revenge. It was the natural consequence of their own choices. The bill had finally come due. 2 months after the story aired, I received a large manila envelope in the mail from the Children's Cancer Research Alliance. I expected it to be tax documents or a formal thank you note. Instead, inside was a stack of papers, and on top was a handwritten letter. It was from a woman named Maria. Her 7-year-old daughter, Chloe, had been diagnosed with the same rare form of leukemia that had taken Tyler. Her letter said that their local hospital didn't have the resources for the experimental treatment Chloe needed, and their insurance had denied coverage. They had lost hope. Then the Alliance had called. A new fund, the Tyler Harrison Memorial Fund, had been established. It was designated specifically to help children in situations just like hers. Chloe was starting her treatment next week. Tucked behind the letter was a drawing done in crayon on lined paper. It showed 2 stick figures, a little girl with bright yellow hair and a boy with a halo and angel wings. They were holding hands. At the bottom, in shaky, childish letters, it said, "Thank you, Tyler, for being my friend in heaven." The tears I hadn't shed for months finally came. They weren't tears of grief or of anger. They were tears of overwhelming, heartbreaking gratitude. This was the legacy, not the ruin of my family, but this drawing, this little girl who would get a chance to live. I found my purpose in that envelope. I began volunteering with the Alliance, working as a liaison for families newly entering the terrifying world of pediatric cancer. I was the person I had desperately needed when Tyler was sick. Someone who understood, someone who would just show up. Last week, I met a young mother named Sarah in the hospital cafeteria. Her daughter had just been diagnosed. Her eyes were wide with the same terror I remembered so well. I bought her a coffee, and I just listened. I didn't offer platitudes or false hope. I just sat with her in the darkness and told her she wasn't alone. They had wanted to buy a party with my son's legacy, a fleeting, forgotten afternoon of champagne and small talk. But I had built a future with it instead. A future filled with hope, with second chances, with little girls who get to keep drawing pictures. And in that standing here now, I finally found my peace.